On the coldest morning of winter when the world seemed frozen in silence, a police officer stepped outside his station and saw something that made his heart stop. A tiny German Shepherd puppy sat alone in the snow, its body shaking, its paws lifted as if it were praying for someone to notice. He almost kept walking, but the puppy ran to him, grabbed his pant leg, and would not let go. What that small, desperate creature was about to lead him to would uncover a truth buried beneath the snow, a secret that would shake an entire town and forever change the lives of a boy, a dog, and the man who chose to follow. If you believe that miracles still happen in the most unexpected places, stay with us until the end. And tell us where you are watching from. Leave your country in the comments. Silver Pine was the kind of town the snow never forgot. Tucked deep in the northern mountains of Montana, it sat under winter like an old photograph left out in the cold, quiet, pale, and stubbornly alive. On that morning, December pressed its full weight against the streets. The sky was low and gray, the wind slid through alleys like something searching for a voice, and thick snowflakes fell in long, patient lines, erasing the edges of the world. The courthouse bell had not yet struck 8 when Officer Caleb Wilder stepped out of his patrol SUV in front of the Silver Pine Police Department, his boots sinking slightly into the fresh powder. Caleb was 41 years old, tall, broad-shouldered, with a frame that looked built for carrying burdens. His face bore the lines of years spent listening to other people's disasters, creases at the corners of tired blue eyes, a mouth that rarely smiled unless children or animals were involved, and hair once dark brown now threaded with early silver. He had the quiet temperament of a man who spoke little and noticed everything. A long-ago tragedy, the loss of his wife to a winter highway accident 7 years earlier, had shaped him into someone careful with words and fiercely gentle with the broken. His night shift had ended minutes before, but he lingered outside the station, letting the cold scrape the exhaustion from his bones. Inside, the warm lights glowed faintly, and somewhere in the building, Officer Grant Halloway, a stocky, middle-aged desk sergeant with a perpetual coffee stain on his uniform and the humor of someone who survived on sarcasm, was filing reports and muttering about paperwork. Caleb stretched, pulled his gloves tighter, and was about to step inside when something stopped him. Near the bottom of the station steps, half buried by drifting snow, sat a German Shepherd puppy. It could not have been more than 6 or 7 months old. Its coat was thick but matted with ice, black along the spine and muzzle, rich brown on the legs and chest, the colors muted by frost. One ear drooped slightly, the other stood alert. Its body was thin but not starving, the thinness of an animal that had run too far too fast. Its paws were raw, pink beneath torn fur, and tiny crystals of ice clung to its whiskers. What struck Caleb first were the eyes, wide, amber, unblinking, burning with a fear too heavy for something so young. The puppy lifted both front paws and pressed them together, trembling, not barking, not retreating, only watching him with an intensity that reached straight through the winter air. "Hey there," Caleb said softly, lowering himself to one knee. His voice had always been gentle, a habit learned from years of calming victims and frightened kids. The puppy didn't move. Snow gathered along its back and melted against the warmth of its skin. Caleb noticed the small leather collar around its neck, worn but intact, and a tarnished tag that read, "Atlas." "You lost, buddy?" The puppy took a step, then another, and suddenly clamped its small jaws around the cuff of Caleb's pant leg. Not biting, not hard, but urgent. It pulled. Caleb felt the tug vibrate through his boot. He stayed still, heart tightening. The puppy released, ran 3 steps away, turned, and whined. A thin, broken sound that seemed to crack the quiet morning in two. It rushed back and tugged again, its whole body shaking with effort. This was not hunger. This was not confusion. This was desperation. Grant's voice drifted from inside the station as he cracked the door. "Caleb, you seen what I'm seeing?" Grant was short, thick in the waist, his dark mustache dusted with gray, eyes permanently narrowed as if the world amused and annoyed him at the same time. "Looks like you've got yourself a new partner." Caleb didn't answer. He reached out slowly and touched the puppy's neck. Its heart hammered beneath his palm, a frantic bird trapped in ribs. He crouched lower, searching the animal's body. There were thin scratches along its muzzle, as if it had chewed through something rough, and burrs tangled in its fur. The smell of cold metal and damp earth clung to it. The puppy looked back toward the street, then at Caleb again, then pulled harder. "Grant," Caleb said quietly, eyes never leaving Atlas. "I'm stepping out for a bit." Grant blinked. "You're kidding." Caleb shook his head. "Something's wrong." The puppy released Caleb's pant leg and trotted toward the sidewalk, stopping every few steps to look back, its ears flicking, its mouth open in a silent plea. Snow continued falling, patient and thick, as if the sky itself were holding its breath. Caleb stood, adjusted his jacket, and followed. His boots crunched against gravel and ice as they crossed the front lot. The puppy's movements were frantic but purposeful, like it had memorized a path through fear. It ran, stopped, waited, and ran again, never letting Caleb fall more than 10 feet behind. "Slow down," Caleb murmured, though he matched the pace easily. He glanced once over his shoulder. Grant stood in the doorway, arms crossed, a look of disbelief on his face. "You adopting that thing or what?" he called. Caleb lifted a hand in brief acknowledgement, already turning back. The puppy led him across Cedar Street, forcing Caleb to wave down a delivery truck whose driver, a young man with a beard and worried eyes, slammed his brakes. The puppy didn't hesitate, darting through the road like it had no room left for fear. On the opposite sidewalk, it tugged Caleb again, harder this time, then broke into a shaky run. As they moved farther from the station, the world seemed to quiet. Houses clustered closer together, their paint peeling. Porches sagging under the weight of years and snow. Wind whistled through bare branches. The air smelled faintly of wood smoke and old metal. Caleb noticed the distance wasn't far, less than a mile, but every step carried the gravity of a promise he hadn't yet spoken. He knelt once more, brushing snow from the puppy's face. "What happened to you?" The puppy's ears flattened, and it let out a broken whimper that seemed older than winter. Then it turned and ran again. Caleb's radio crackled. Grant's voice. "You okay, Wilder?" Caleb pressed the button. "Yeah, keep my channel open." There was a pause. 10-4, be careful. They passed an alley where trash bins lay tipped over, snow half burying their contents. The puppy squeezed beneath a half-open chain-link gate behind an abandoned hardware store. Caleb lifted it enough to slip through. On the other side, the air felt colder, the quiet thicker, as if something had happened here recently and the land had not yet decided how to speak of it. The puppy barked once, sharp and urgent, and bolted toward a small open field separating the commercial strip from the older residential blocks. Caleb jogged after it, scanning the ground. Near the edge of the field, half hidden in snow, lay a child's glove. Blue, soaked through, one finger torn. The puppy ran to it, pawed, and looked up at Caleb with those same burning eyes. His stomach tightened. He picked up the glove. The fabric was damp, the tear fresh. Nearby, faint marks marred the snow, small, uneven footprints leading toward the houses beyond. "Is someone out here?" Caleb whispered. The puppy barked again, then sprinted forward. The wind rose, carrying the sound of distant church bells. Caleb followed, breath clouding in the air, heart beginning to understand what his mind had not yet fully named. Deeper into the neighborhood they went, past sagging fences and shuttered windows, until the world seemed to narrow around them. The puppy never once slowed enough to doubt him. It only looked back again and again to be sure he was still there. And he was. Always. Because sometimes the snow did not fall to bury things. Sometimes it fell to reveal them. And on that morning in Silver Pine, a small dog named Atlas had chosen his rescuer. The wind sharpened as they moved farther from the heart of Silver Pine, slicing through the quiet streets like a blade made of ice. Snow fell in steady, patient waves, covering the world in a white hush that felt almost holy. Officer Caleb Wilder kept his pace measured behind the puppy named Atlas, careful not to startle him, though the young dog's body trembled with a kind of urgency that could not be slowed. Atlas's paws struck the frozen ground with uneven rhythm, fast, uncertain, but relentless. Every few yards he stopped and turned, eyes locked on Caleb's face, as if checking the promise he had not yet spoken out loud. Caleb nodded each time, offering nothing but presence, the one gift Winter never refused. The path Atlas chose was not random. It cut through the quiet edges of the neighborhood where houses leaned close to one another. Paint peeled from old wood like forgotten scars, and porch steps sagged beneath years of snow and silence. Smoke rose thin from distant chimneys. Somewhere, a radio played faint Christmas music, the sound thin and lonely in the open air. Caleb noticed the distance from the station could not have been more than a mile, maybe a little more, yet the feeling in his chest made it seem as if he had crossed into another world. Atlas slowed near a narrow footpath between two abandoned buildings. A gust of wind carried the smell of rust and damp wood. The puppy squeezed through first, then stopped, circling back to tug at Caleb's pant leg, urging him onward. "All right," Caleb murmured. "I'm with you." The path opened into a half-frozen lot behind the shuttered hardware store. Snowdrifts rose unevenly around rusted shopping carts and broken pallets. Atlas trotted ahead, nose low, tracking something only he could see. Caleb's eyes scanned the ground, every instinct alert. Near the edge of the lot, half buried in snow, lay something blue. Atlas rushed to it, pawed at it, then lifted his head and whined. Caleb knelt. It was a child's glove, the fabric soaked and stiff with cold, one fingertip torn open as if it had been dragged across something sharp. The tear was fresh. The edges were darkened with dirt. Caleb's breath caught. He followed the faint line of marks in the snow leading away from the glove. Small footprints, uneven, too short to belong to any adult. They wove across the lot toward the tree line behind the houses. "Hey," Caleb whispered, more to the world than to Atlas. "Where are you taking me?" Atlas barked once, sharp and desperate, then broke into a run. The snow deepened as they crossed into the narrow strip of woods separating the old commercial district from the residential blocks beyond. Branches sagged beneath heavy frost, releasing soft avalanches of white as the wind shook them. Caleb's boots sank into drifts that swallowed his ankles. Atlas kept moving, driven by something stronger than fear. Every so often, Caleb noticed scratches along the puppy's muzzle, the faint red lines crusted with ice, as if Atlas had chewed or forced his way through something that refused to let him go. The forest thinned near the back of the neighborhood, opening into a patch of ground scattered with debris. Atlas slowed, circling a dark shape in the snow. Caleb stepped closer and saw it was a torn piece of a child's jacket, green fabric, the lining exposed, threads still stretching where the tear had been made. Next to it lay a length of rope, frayed at one end, the fibers stiff with frozen saliva. Caleb swallowed. The rope had been chewed through. His mind built the picture without asking permission. He crouched, studying the ground. More small footprints appeared, deeper here, uneven, as if whoever had made them had stumbled or run. There were also larger boot prints, heavier, spaced farther apart, moving in the same direction. Atlas pawed at the rope, then turned and pressed his nose against Caleb's knee, whining. "You did this, didn't you?" Caleb murmured. The puppy's tail flicked weakly. He had no answer, only the truth written in his eyes. They moved on, leaving the forest behind and entering the far edge of the neighborhood where the houses grew older, quieter, and more forgotten. Windows were clouded with frost. Weeds poked through broken fences like the fingers of something buried alive. Snow muffled the world until only the sound of their breathing remained. Atlas's pace slowed as they approached a sagging house at the end of Ridgeway Street. The building stood alone, its faded paint stripped by years of wind, the porch steps swallowed by drifts. The front door hung crooked, slightly open, and one window on the side was shattered, the glass frozen in jagged teeth along the frame. Atlas stopped at the edge of the yard, legs trembling. He turned back to Caleb and let out the lowest, saddest whine yet. A sound that seemed to carry the weight of everything he had seen and could not forget. Caleb's hand drifted toward his radio, then fell back. He was not ready to call this in yet, not until he understood what waited inside. Snow creaked beneath his boots as he stepped onto the porch. Atlas followed close, pressing his body against Caleb's leg, as if afraid the world might swallow him again if he stood alone. The air near the house felt wrong, colder, heavier, as if the snow itself had decided not to enter. Caleb nudged the door with his gloved hand. It swung inward with a long, hollow groan. The smell hit him first. Damp wood, old dust, and something metallic beneath it. The living room lay in chaos, a chair overturned, a lamp shattered across the floor. Dark streaks marked the carpet, thin and uneven. Drag marks leading toward the hallway. Atlas crept forward, nose low, then froze. He turned and looked at Caleb with eyes wide as winter. The house was empty but not quiet. Something lingered here, thick in the air, heavy with the echo of fear. Caleb moved slowly, each step careful. He followed the drag marks down the narrow hall. On the wall, near the doorway to what might once have been a bedroom, he saw a faint smear at the height of a child's hand, dirt and something darker mixed together. His jaw tightened. Atlas darted ahead, skidding to a stop at a narrow door at the end of the hall. The door stood slightly open. From behind it came a breath of cold air that did not belong to the winter outside. Atlas barked once, then scratched at the wood, frantic now, the sound sharp and raw in the hollow house. Caleb's heart pounded. He placed a steady hand on the door and pushed. A staircase descended into darkness. The smell grew stronger, damp and stale, the kind of cold that lived where the sun had not reached in years. Caleb flicked on his flashlight. Dust swirled in the beam like slow-falling snow. "Easy," he whispered. Atlas did not wait. He slipped past Caleb and began down the steps, his small body shaking, his breathing fast, the sound of his claws echoing off the walls. Caleb followed, one hand resting near his holster, the other steady on the rail. The basement opened into a low, narrow space. Old crates lined the walls. Torn scraps of fabric lay scattered across the concrete floor. The flashlight beam swept across the room, catching on something in the corner. A small shape curled tight against the wall. Caleb's breath hitched. "Hello?" he called softly. The shape moved. A faint sound reached him, thin and broken, a whisper of breath. Atlas raced forward, squeezing through the debris, whining. Caleb pushed aside a crate, the wood clattering loudly, and knelt. A boy, no more than 9, lay bound at the wrist with rope, his face pale, lips blue, eyes half open and glassy with exhaustion. Dirt streaked his cheeks. Dried tears marked his skin. Atlas threw himself against the boy's chest, licking his face, pawing at him desperately. The boy's eyes fluttered, then focused on Caleb. A flicker of something fragile and bright passed across his face. You came," he whispered. Caleb swallowed and holstered his weapon. "Hey, kid," he said, voice low and steady. "You're safe now. I've got you." The boy's gaze shifted to Atlas. His lips trembled. "He went for help. My dog, my Atlas." Caleb reached for his radio. "Dispatch, this is Wilder," he said urgently. "I've located a child alive but restrained at a residence on Ridgeway. I need medical assistance and backup immediately." The reply crackled through the static. "Copy that. Units en route." Caleb pulled out his knife and cut the rope. The fibers fell away. The boy let out a weak sob and clung to Caleb's jacket, as if afraid the world might disappear if he blinked. Atlas circled them, tail low, ears back, still trembling but refusing to leave the boy's side. Caleb wrapped his arm around the child's shoulders, lifting him gently. "What's your name?" he asked. "Evan," the boy whispered. Snow drifted down the basement window well, catching the light like distant stars. Caleb looked at the child, then at the puppy who had crossed the frozen town to save him. The wind howled outside, but in that dark, broken basement something else was happening. Something the winter would remember. The snow kept falling outside the broken house on Ridgeway, but the basement remained locked in a colder silence, as if winter itself dared not cross the threshold. Officer Caleb Wilder knelt on the concrete floor, one arm braced around Evan's narrow shoulders, steadying the boy's trembling weight while the other hand reached for his radio. The boy's breath fluttered weakly against the frigid air, each inhale shallow, each exhale barely visible. His wrists, once bound by coarse rope, were now free but marked with angry red lines that glowed against pale skin. Caleb's jaw tightened as he studied them. Years on the force had shown him injuries, but never without cost. Each one settled somewhere deep, a place the cold could not touch. Evan, 9 years old, was small for his age, with sandy blonde hair matted by sweat and dust, and gray-blue eyes dulled by exhaustion, yet still alive with stubborn hope. His clothes were torn at the knees and elbows, streaked with dirt, and his shoes were soaked through, leaving his toes numb and blue beneath thin fabric. He leaned into Caleb instinctively, like a child recognizing safety before understanding it. Beside them, Atlas, the young German shepherd, hovered close, his body rigid with fear and devotion. The puppy's coat was thick and coarse with ice along the spine, the black and tan fur darkened by melting snow. His amber eyes darted between Evan's face and Caleb's, never settling, his ears pinned back as if the house itself might rise against them. Every few seconds, Atlas pressed his nose to Evan's cheek or licked the boy's hands, checking that he was still breathing, still real. "Easy, buddy," Caleb murmured to the dog, his voice carrying the same calm he used for frightened children and dying men. "He's here. He's okay." Evan's lips moved. They left this morning," he whispered, his voice thin as frost. "They said they'd be back before dark." Caleb felt the weight of the words settle into his bones. He glanced up the narrow basement stairs, the broken light above swaying slightly in the wind. Outside, the storm continued its patient work, the world wrapped in white and silence. The men could return at any moment. "Can you stand?" Caleb asked gently. Evan nodded weakly, though his legs shook when he tried. Caleb scooped him up without hesitation, lifting the boy into his arms. Evan clung to his jacket, fingers digging into the heavy fabric as if afraid the floor might disappear beneath him. Atlas followed close, brushing his small body against Caleb's boots at every step, a silent promise of loyalty written in motion. They climbed the stairs slowly, the wood groaning under their weight. The living room greeted them with its chaos. Overturned furniture, broken glass frozen in place, drag marks across the carpet. The smell of fear still clung to the air. Caleb set Evan down gently against the wall near the front window, where faint gray daylight filtered through cracked blinds. Evan winced, pressing a hand to the side of his head. "My head hurts," he whispered. Caleb crouched beside him. Now that the adrenaline had softened, he saw the injury clearly, a swollen bruise behind Evan's right ear, dark and ugly, already blooming purple. A sign of blunt trauma. A sign of how close this had come to ending very differently. "Stay awake for me, okay?" Caleb said. "Help is coming." Evan nodded, blinking slowly. Atlas curled at the boy's feet, his body pressed tight against Evan's legs, eyes fixed on the dark hallway leading back to the basement as if daring something unseen to return. Caleb lifted his radio again. "Dispatch, this is Wilder. The child has a head injury. I need medics immediately." The reply came through the static. "Copy that. Units are 4 minutes out." 4 minutes could be a lifetime. Evan swallowed. "Officer, can I tell you what happened?" Caleb met his gaze. "I'm listening." The boy's voice trembled but grew steadier as the words spilled out. "I was walking home from school yesterday. It was snowing like this. A black truck stopped. A man asked me for directions, then someone grabbed me from behind. They put something over my face. It smelled bad. I woke up down there." His eyes flicked toward the basement door. "They tied me up. They argued. One said, 'No witnesses.' The other said, 'We just need the information.'" Caleb's stomach twisted. "Information about what?" Evan shook his head. "I don't know. They kept saying I was the wrong kid, but they didn't let me go." A chill slid down Caleb's spine. This was not a random crime, not a runaway. Something darker lived beneath these words. Evan's breathing hitched. "They left this morning. I loosened Atlas's collar and told him to run. I told him to find someone good. someone who looked safe. The boy's gaze lifted to Caleb's face, fragile and unguarded. He found you. Caleb felt something break open in his chest. Not pain. Not exactly. Something like awe mixed with grief and gratitude. Atlas, barely more than a puppy, had crossed the frozen town on faith alone. A low growl vibrated from Atlas's throat. Caleb turned. The sound was not fear. It was warning. Through the broken front window, he saw movement, faint tire tracks appearing in the falling snow, slow and deliberate, cutting across the yard. An engine's low rumble drifted through the air. Evan stiffened. They're back. Caleb's pulse surged. He rose quickly, lifting Evan into his arms. We're leaving, now. He moved toward the back of the house, boots silent against the old floor, but voices echoed on the porch. Two men, close, their words sharp. Check the basement first, one said. If he's gone, someone's been here. Caleb ducked into a narrow laundry room off the hall and gently lowered Evan behind an old washing machine. The space was tight, dust thick in the air. Atlas crawled in beside the boy, curling protectively against him. Caleb knelt. Stay quiet, no matter what you hear. Evan nodded, tears slipping down his cheeks. Caleb stepped back into the hallway as the front door creaked open. Heavy boots crossed the threshold. The men's shadows stretched long across the wall. Hey, one muttered. The ropes are cut. Caleb drew his weapon. He stepped into view. Police, don't move. The men spun. One lunged with a wrench. Caleb fired a warning shot into the ceiling, plaster raining down, and blocked the swing with his forearm, pain flaring up his arm as metal scraped skin. He struck back hard, driving the attacker into the wall. The second man bolted toward the back of the house. Atlas burst from the laundry room, a flash of black and tan, and launched himself at the fleeing man's ankle. The man stumbled with a shout, crashing into the doorframe. The wrench clattered to the floor. Caleb seized the moment, tackling the remaining attacker, forcing him down, snapping the cuffs around his wrists, just as sirens wailed in the distance. Snow and blue lights flooded the windows. The house exhaled. Caleb hurried back to Evan. The boy was sobbing now, clutching Atlas's fur, the puppy's tail wagging weakly as if he too could finally breathe again. You did good, Caleb whispered to Atlas. Both of you. Outside, boots thundered. Backup flooded the yard. Paramedics rushed in. As Evan was lifted onto a stretcher, his small hand clutched Atlas's collar. He saved me, Evan whispered. Caleb nodded. Yeah, he did. The snow kept falling over Ridgeway Street, but the house had finally released its secrets. The sirens faded into the distance as the ambulance cut through the winter streets of Silverpine, its red lights smeared across the falling snow like paint dragged over glass. Officer Caleb Wilder followed close behind in his patrol car, the heater on full, his hands tight on the steering wheel. In the back of the ambulance, Evan lay wrapped in silver thermal blankets, oxygen tubing resting beneath his nose, his small chest rising and falling in shallow, stubborn breaths. Beside him, pressed against the stretcher rail, Atlas sat upright, the young German shepherd's head lifted with solemn attention, amber eyes fixed on the boy as if the world itself had narrowed to that fragile rhythm of breathing. Paramedic Lena Morales, a woman in her early 30s with dark hair braided down her back and the calm presence of someone who had learned to carry chaos without letting it spill, kept one hand on Evan's wrist, counting his pulse, murmuring encouragement whenever his eyelids fluttered. The hospital doors slid open with a rush of warm air and antiseptic. Nurses converged. Evan was wheeled away down a corridor washed in fluorescent light, Atlas trotting alongside, his paws clicking on tile, his body refusing to fall behind. Caleb stayed close, his badge catching the light as he walked, his expression carved from worry and resolve. A doctor with wire-rimmed glasses, Dr. Howard Klein, late 50s, thin, balding, and gentle in the way men become when they have spent a lifetime delivering both hope and bad news, met them at the trauma bay. He listened as Lena delivered her report. Head injury, dehydration, rope abrasions, prolonged restraint. He nodded once, brisk but kind, and waved them through. Evan was settled into a private room. Monitors beeped softly. A nurse cleaned the dried blood behind his ear. Atlas lay curled at the foot of the bed, nose tucked beneath his tail, eyes still open. Caleb leaned against the wall, watching the boy's face for any sign the world might slip away again. It did not. Evan opened his eyes and whispered. He stayed and reached down to touch Atlas's fur. The puppy's tail thumped once against the metal frame. Within the hour, the storm of sirens and procedures slowed. The boy's breathing steadied. Dr. Klein confirmed the injury was serious but not life-threatening. Evan would be kept overnight for observation. Caleb finally allowed himself to exhale. He stepped into the hallway where Detective Marissa Hale was waiting. Marissa was mid-30s, tall and spare, with sharp brown eyes and a habit of tucking loose strands of black hair behind her ear when she thought. She had arrived with the second wave of responders at Ridgeway and had already begun to peel back the crime scene like layers of ice. "We need to talk," Marissa said quietly. "Not here." They walked down the corridor to a small conference room overlooking the snow-covered parking lot. Through the glass, Silver Pine lay hushed, the world remade in white. Marissa set a tablet on the table and slid it toward Caleb. On the screen were photographs from the house, rope fibers, torn fabric, the frayed end Atlas had chewed through, a pair of gloves recovered from the porch, the wrench used in the attack. "This wasn't a random grab," she said. "The men weren't local. Plates on the truck were fake. VIN's been scratched." Caleb's jaw tightened. What were they after? Marissa tapped the screen, bringing up a screenshot of messages pulled from a cheap burner phone found on the attacker they cuffed. The words were blunt, unfeeling. "Bring the kid. We need confirmation. No loose ends." "We think they were supposed to hand Evan off to a third party," she said. "Middlemen." Caleb stared at the text. "Confirmation of what?" "That's what we're trying to figure out." A uniformed officer, Theo Barnes, 26, lanky, with earnest eyes and a voice that still carried the edges of youth, poked his head in. "Detective, we pulled security footage from the convenience store 2 blocks from where the boy was taken." They watched the grainy clip. A black truck idled at the curb. 2 men inside. Children walked past, backpacks bright against the gray afternoon. The truck eased forward, slow, deliberate, hunting. Caleb's fists curled. They were watching. "Yeah," Marissa said, "and it gets worse." She lowered her voice. "Evan's father works in cybersecurity for a federal contractor. Sensitive data, high clearance." The pieces slid together. "They took the boy to pressure the father," Caleb said. Marissa nodded. "We believe so. The men you stopped were just the front. Someone else is waiting for what they were supposed to deliver." Silence settled between them, heavy as snow on branches. "Without the dog," Marissa added, glancing back toward Evan's room, "we wouldn't even have known the kid was missing yet." Caleb followed her gaze. Through the open door he could see Atlas, now stretched along the bed, his head resting against Evan's ribs, the boy's fingers threaded through his fur. The sight struck him harder than any blow that morning. He had spent 14 years wearing a badge, standing between danger and strangers, but he had never seen courage like that. Small, trembling, unshakable. Caleb excused himself and returned to the room. Evan slept. Atlas lifted his head when Caleb entered, ears flicking, then settled again. Sarah Miller, Evan's mother, sat in the chair by the window. She was early 40s, tall and slender, with pale skin and ash blonde hair pulled into a loose knot, her eyes rimmed red from crying. She rose when she saw Caleb. "They said he's going to be okay," she whispered, as if afraid to speak it too loudly. Her husband, Nathan Miller, mid-40s, broad-shouldered, with tired eyes and a jaw set by years of responsibility, stood beside her, one hand resting on the bed rail. "Because of him," Sarah said, nodding toward Atlas. Caleb inclined his head. "He's something special." Sarah's mouth trembled into a smile. "We adopted Atlas in August. The shelter told us he'd been found near the highway, starving. He was so quiet at first, like he was afraid the world would disappear if he made a sound." She brushed a hand over the puppy's back. "He learned our routines, learned when Evan had nightmares. He'd climb into bed and lie across his chest until he calmed down. Nathan cleared his throat. We used to joke he was Evan's shadow. Caleb felt the weight of the word, shadow, settle somewhere deep. Atlas had not been a stray that wandered into this storm. He had been a survivor long before the snow asked him to be a hero. Night fell over Silverpine. Outside the hospital windows, the storm softened into a slow, steady drift. Inside, officers rotated through statements and paperwork. Marissa briefed her team. The two men were transferred to county holding, their faces gray with fear and fury. Leads were chased. Phones were traced. The case grew larger by the hour. Near midnight, Caleb stepped into the hallway, leaning against the wall, the day finally catching up with him. He thought of the moment outside the station when he had almost walked past a trembling puppy. Almost. He shook his head, a quiet laugh escaping. Sometimes the smallest decisions carried the greatest weight. The next morning, the sun rose pale over a town still buried in snow. Evan woke with color in his cheeks. Atlas greeted him with a soft bark and a careful lick. Dr. Klein confirmed the swelling had stabilized. Evan would stay another night for observation, but the worst had passed. Reporters gathered outside the hospital, their breath visible in the cold. They asked about the dog, about the rescue, about the men in custody. Caleb kept his answers short. This was not about headlines. This was about a boy who still clutched his dog's fur when he slept. 2 weeks later, Silverpine gathered in the town hall. A banner hung over the small stage, honoring our smallest hero. The mayor spoke. The chief of police, Robert Gaines, a large man with a soft voice and eyes that had seen too much, stepped to the microphone and described the courage of a young German shepherd who had crossed a winter town alone to save a child. Atlas was lifted onto the stage, his paws slipping on the polished wood, his tail wagging in a blur. A small medal, no bigger than a silver coin, was placed around his neck. The room erupted in applause. Evan, in a wheelchair with a healing bruise behind his ear, laughed, the sound bright and free. "Good boy, Atlas," he whispered. When the noise finally softened, Chief Gaines raised a hand. "One more thing," he said. "Officer Wilder has submitted a request. With the family's support, Atlas will begin training with our K-9 program." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Evan's eyes widened, then shone. Atlas barked once, sharp and proud. Afterward, in the cold afternoon light, Caleb knelt beside Evan in the parking lot. Snow fell in soft feathers. "He'll train with me," Caleb said. "He'll protect this town, but he'll always come back to you." Evan nodded, tears spilling. Atlas pressed his head into the boy's chest. Sarah and Nathan stepped forward. "We talked," Sarah said. "We want Atlas to stay with you, to help others. But we want Evan to see him, to know he's still his." Caleb swallowed. "He will, I promise." Evan looked up. "Ours?" Caleb smiled. "Ours." The wind moved through the bare trees. Snow continued its patient work. In the quiet that followed, the winter of Silverpine seemed to listen, and for the first time in many days, it did not feel so cold. By the time the ambulance reached Silverpine County Hospital, the storm had softened into a slow, drifting snowfall, as if winter itself were finally willing to loosen its grip. The automatic doors slid open and warm light spilled over the frozen world outside. Inside, everything moved quickly. Voices, footsteps, the squeak of wheels, the soft commands of nurses. But in the center of it all lay Evan, small and pale, beneath a silver emergency blanket, his chest rising in shallow, stubborn breaths. Officer Caleb Wilder stayed close as paramedics transferred the boy onto a hospital bed. Caleb's tall frame cast a long shadow over the white tile floor, his face carved with exhaustion and quiet determination. His uniform was streaked with dried snow and faint smears of blood that were not his own. He did not notice. His attention never left Evan. Curled at the boy's side was Atlas, the young German shepherd, his amber eyes fixed on Evan's face, his body rigid with loyalty. Every time Evan's breathing faltered or his eyelids fluttered, Atlas shifted closer, pressing his warm body against the boy's ribs, as if anchoring him to the world. A nurse named Margaret Sloan, late 40s, round-faced with silver-streaked hair pulled into a tight bun and a voice that carried both authority and kindness, checked Evan's vitals. Head trauma, she murmured. Dehydration. Rope abrasions. He's lucky. Caleb nodded. Lucky was not the word he would have chosen. Miraculous came closer. A few minutes later, a man and woman burst through the emergency doors. Nathan Miller, Evan's father, was tall and broad-shouldered, his dark coat still dusted with snow, his face drawn tight with fear and exhaustion. He had the look of a man who carried responsibility the way others carried scars. Behind him came Sarah Miller, Evan's mother, slender, pale, ash-blonde hair tumbling loose around her shoulders, her eyes red and swollen from crying. Her hands shook as she scanned the room. When Sarah saw Evan, a sound broke from her chest that was half sob, half prayer. Evan! She rushed to his bedside, dropping to her knees, gathering his small hands in hers. Nathan followed, his large frame bending low as if afraid the ceiling itself might collapse if he stood too tall. Evan's eyes opened. Mom, he whispered. Dad. Sarah pressed her forehead to his, tears streaming freely now. Nathan cupped the back of Evan's head, his jaw trembling. We thought we lost you, Nathan said, his voice cracking. Evan swallowed. His gaze drifted to the warm, black and tan shape curled beside him. I didn't, he said softly. Because of him. Sarah followed his eyes and froze. The dog? Evan nodded. Atlas. He went for help. He brought the officer. Sarah lifted a trembling hand to her mouth. Nathan turned slowly toward Caleb. You, he said. Caleb met his gaze. Your son saved himself, Caleb replied quietly. I just followed the one who knew where to go. Atlas lifted his head at the sound of Caleb's voice. His tail gave a slow, tired wag. Sarah reached down and brushed her fingers through Atlas's fur. Thank you, she whispered to the dog, her voice breaking. Thank you for not leaving him. Atlas licked her hand once, solemn and gentle, as if he understood every word. Later that night, as Evan slept under careful observation, Caleb stood with Detective Marissa Hale in a quiet conference room on the hospital's upper floor. Outside the wide windows, snow drifted across the parking lot, erasing tire tracks, softening the world. Marissa placed several folders on the table and slid one toward Caleb. We've been working the phones in the truck. Caleb opened the file. Photographs, transcripts, a map marked with red circles. The men you stopped weren't freelancers, Marissa said. They're part of a larger network, middlemen. The boy wasn't the target. Caleb's eyes lifted. Then who was? Marissa tapped the file labeled Miller. Nathan Miller. Federal cybersecurity contractor. High-level clearance. Sensitive infrastructure systems. Caleb exhaled slowly. They took the boy to force the father. Yes, Marissa said. The messages on the burner phone were clear. We need confirmation, no loose ends. They planned to trade Evan for information. Caleb stared at the table. His fists tightened. They were going to hand him off, Marissa continued, to someone we still haven't identified. If Atlas hadn't escaped, the boy would already be gone. The silence that followed was heavy and cold. Caleb thought of Atlas. 6 months old, raw paws bleeding in the snow, crossing the town alone. They underestimated him, Caleb said. Marissa's lips twitched. Everyone does. Near dawn, Caleb returned to Evan's room. The boy slept peacefully now, color slowly returning to his cheeks. Sarah sat in the chair beside the bed, her posture folded inward from exhaustion, but her eyes remained open, watching him breathe. Nathan stood near the window, the first pale light of morning outlining his profile. Caleb cleared his throat softly. We know why they took him. Nathan turned. Sarah's eyes lifted. Caleb explained. Nathan closed his eyes, pain flashing across his face. They wanted leverage, he whispered. They used my son. Sarah's hands clenched in her lap. Monsters. They're in custody, Caleb said, but the people above them aren't, yet. Nathan nodded grimly. Whatever they want from me, they won't get it. Caleb looked down at Evan. Because of him, he said, nodding toward Atlas. Atlas opened one eye, as if acknowledging the weight of the words. Sarah smiled faintly through her tears. He's not just a dog, she said. He's something else. Caleb watched Atlas breathe in slow, steady rhythm beside the boy he had saved. Yes. He was. Outside, the snow kept falling, but it had failed to claim the boy. 3 weeks after the storm that nearly swallowed Silverpine, the town gathered beneath a sky the color of polished steel. Winter still ruled the mountains, but the wind had softened, and the snow fell in gentle flakes instead of knives. The old brick Silverpine Town Hall glowed warm against the cold afternoon, its windows bright with light and quiet excitement. Inside, chairs filled the main chamber. Families, officers, nurses, shopkeepers, faces both familiar and changed by what they had witnessed. At the front of the hall, a small wooden platform had been set beneath a banner that read, "Honoring our smallest hero officer." Caleb Wilder stood near the side wall, hands folded loosely in front of him, his dark uniform freshly pressed. He looked calmer than he had in weeks, but something deep in his eyes had shifted, as if winter had rearranged the furniture of his heart. Beside him sat Evan Miller, wrapped in a blue blanket in a wheelchair, the fading bruise behind his ear now only a shadow of what it had been. His cheeks were rounder, his eyes brighter. His parents, Sarah and Nathan, stood close. Sarah's ash-blonde hair pulled neatly back, her hands resting lightly on Evan's shoulders. Nathan's broad frame forming an unspoken shield behind them. And between them all, restless, curious, tail wagging in wide, uneven circles, stood Atlas. The young German shepherd had grown in the weeks since the storm. His coat had thickened, his stance steadied, yet he remained unmistakably a puppy. 2 large paws, ears that hadn't quite agreed on where to point, and eyes that carried both mischief and solemn devotion. The small silver medal on his collar glinted softly in the hall's light. When the mayor finished speaking, Chief Robert Gaines stepped forward. He was a tall man with silver hair and a voice that carried the weight of long service and quiet pride. 3 weeks ago, Gaines said, this town was given a reminder. Courage does not always arrive in uniform. Sometimes it comes on 4 paws and a trembling heart. A ripple of soft laughter passed through the room. This young dog crossed a frozen town alone, Gaines continued, guided by nothing but loyalty and love. Because of him, a child is alive today. Because of him, a dangerous network was exposed. And because of him, all of us were reminded who we are meant to be when the world grows cold. Applause rose like wind through trees. Caleb was invited to the platform. He lifted Atlas carefully into his arms. The puppy blinked at the crowd, startled by the noise, then wagged harder as Evan laughed from his chair. Chief Gaines placed a custom-made Silverpine Medal of Bravery around Atlas's neck. The medal was small, no larger than a coin, engraved with a mountain and the date of the rescue. Atlas froze. Then his tail began to move, slow at first, then faster, until it became a joyous blur. The room broke into laughter and applause. Evan clapped weakly, his smile wide and unguarded. After the ceremony, people gathered in clusters, speaking in soft voices, many wiping their eyes. Atlas accepted every head pat and scratch with polite enthusiasm, occasionally sneaking a lick when he thought no one was watching. Outside, the sun hovered low behind the mountains, scattering pale gold across the snow. Caleb stepped out into the cold air with Atlas at his side. The reporters remained inside, giving him the small mercy of quiet. Evan was already outside, his wheelchair parked near the steps, Sarah and Nathan standing beside him. When Atlas spotted Evan, the puppy sprinted across the snow, skidding slightly before colliding gently with the boy's knees. Evan laughed, a sound that carried no memory of fear. "You did it," Evan whispered, wrapping his arms around Atlas's neck. "You're a hero." Caleb crouched beside them. "He earned it." Sarah brushed a tear from her cheek. "We can never repay you." Caleb shook his head. You don't owe me anything. He chose this. Nathan looked at the dog, then at Caleb. His voice lowered. Officer Wilder, we need to talk. They moved a few steps away. We had planned for Evan to receive a service dog next year, Nathan said. Before all of this, but Evan bonded with Atlas the moment we adopted him. We thought, maybe we could train him ourselves. Sarah swallowed. But after what happened, after what he did, we realized he's meant for more. He's meant to protect more people than just our son. Caleb felt something tighten in his chest. What are you saying? Sarah took a slow breath. We want Atlas to stay with you, to train with you, to serve this town. Caleb looked at Atlas, now sitting patiently at Evan's side, his body pressed against the boy's leg. But Evan, Caleb began. Evan rolled his wheelchair closer. His voice was steady, older than 9 years had any right to be. He saved me because he found you. He trusts you. I do too. Caleb knelt. Snow soaked into his trousers. Will I still see him? Evan asked. Caleb placed his hand over Atlas's head. You will never lose him. Not today. Not ever. Evan's eyes filled with tears. Atlas barked once, low and proud. Caleb swallowed. I'll adopt him into the K-9 program. But he won't just be my partner. He'll be ours. This town's. Your family's. Evan smiled through his tears. Ours. The words seemed to settle into the snow itself. The wind passed gently through the bare trees. The mountains stood silent and watchful. And in the quiet space between heartbeats, something old and broken inside Caleb finally rested. Winter had tried to claim them, but the snow had kept its promise. This story reminds us that miracles do not always arrive with thunder or light. Sometimes they come quietly in the form of a small, frightened heart that refuses to give up. When Atlas crossed the frozen town alone, he was not just a dog looking for help. He was part of something greater. A reminder that God often sends hope in the smallest, most unexpected ways. In our daily lives, we all face storms, moments of fear, loneliness, and doubt. And many times the answer we are praying for is already walking toward us wearing a different shape than we imagined. If you are struggling today, remember this: God is still writing your story. Even when the road feels cold and silent, you are not walking alone. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who needs hope today. Leave a comment to tell us where you are watching from and what this message means to you. Subscribe to the channel so you never miss another story of courage and faith. And may God bless every person watching this video, protect your family, guide your steps, and fill your life with peace. If you believe in miracles and in the power of love, leave a comment with the word Amen.